Hi, and welcome to the podcast. Previously, I've talked about the importance of meeting with other writers and getting feedback on your writing and providing comments to others on theirs. And this is an integral part of the writing process. So the myth of the solitary, brooding writer, locking themselves in a cave for a few months while they work on their manuscript is exactly that. It's a myth. It doesn't work that way. In fact, having a writing circle or a small group of friends who can read your material and provide constructive feedback on it is super important, and it's such a vital part of the writing process that I constantly reinforce this idea with my writers and in the workshops that I run as well. It's critical, in fact, to producing the best work that you can produce. And I mention that today because I have my first novel that I wrote, and it's the novel that shall never see the light of day. Because it was so bad. And so that was my first attempt, and that was many, many years ago. And honestly, it was brutal. So here's the story around my first novel, the one that shall never see the light of day. So I'd done a lot of research into how to write a novel. I was bound and determined to write a story, and this was one of my dreams that I wanted. So I was quite motivated and found a bunch of different methods and things that I could use and cobble together to actually write a novel, and it was working in the sense that. For the first time ever, I had a decent plan that I was following and producing all kinds of words. So tens of thousands of words. So I was up around, I think I was up around 60,000 words. And at that point, work was getting really, really intense. So I had to set my manuscript aside for a couple of months while work took priority, and then when I came back to the manuscript, to my draft, I thought, well, I'd better read through all of this to get back up to speed and get back to work. So that's what I did. Of course, I started reading, and oh my goodness, so there were a lot of issues. Now I recognize it was a first draft, so I went in there with eyes wide open, like I knew that it would require some revision. But what I didn't understand was how much of a jerk my protagonist was, and this is the kiss of death for a hero in a story. I mean, if your reader doesn't like your protagonist, if they don't like the hero, then your story is doomed. And so that's what I found. I found that my hero was a complete jerk and unlikable. I mean, there were elements of it, of course, that were okay, but for the most part, this guy, my hero was a real piece of work, and I thought, oh, this is just terrible, and that was one problem among many. Anyway, I did look at it, and I tried fixing it up a little bit and rewriting some sections and some chapters, and doing those sorts of things that a writer would do, and it was beyond repair. So this is the novel that was my training ground. This was my sandbox where I was learning all kinds of things, and I recommend you doing the same thing. Like take the pressure off yourself. You don't have to write a bestseller for your first novel. Just write it, and you'll learn so much. And that's what happened to me. So I learned so much from going through that process. And one of the things that I really that became really clear for me was the need to get feedback early and often during the writing process from other writers who are encouraging you to write the best that you can. So, as an example, if now I do need to preface this by saying that I was writing my first draft in isolation, so I fell into the belief that the myth of the solitary writer was actually true, and this is how you do it. But I since learned that that's not the way to do it, that it's critical to have a small group of like-minded writers who can encourage you and help you see things that you might be blind to. So I was certainly blind to the fact that my protagonist was too much of a jerk to be likable. Now, it's true that you don't want your hero to be perfect. Every protagonist has good traits and some faults as well. That's what makes them interesting. But in my case, my protagonist's faults outnumbered the good qualities, and that was the kiss of death for it. So what I'm saying is that if I had feedback on that earlier in the story, I would have been able to see it and make adjustments so that my hero would have been much more likable and sympathetic. So that could have saved a lot of trouble. And I see this too in others in other writers' work as well. So that if there is feedback that's given early and often and consistently through the course of writing your manuscript, it just makes the whole process that much better. So you'll be able to spot those problem areas soon enough that you can fix them before that error gets propagated through the rest of your manuscript. And this is going to really help you create a story that not only has a likable protagonist, but also your villain would be fleshed out, and your romantic character or your confidant would also be fleshed out as well. So, and your plotting points would be of greater interest too. So it's really, really important, and I know I emphasize this often, it's really important to share your work as you're going along to get that feedback so you can make the adjustments that you need to make before they become really problematic in your story. You don't really want to end up with a novel that shall not see the light of day. I'm a strong proponent that your first novel should be your testing ground. This is where you're learning the craft, the fundamentals of writing and storytelling. So it doesn't mean that your first draft is going to, or your first novel is going to be published at all. It doesn't need to be. You may not want that to begin with. But looking at it as a training ground, it's super important to learn as much as you can from the process while you're going through it. And this is why getting that feedback is so critical to putting together a story that's going to hang together, that's going to be interesting, and that's going to keep your reader engaged. So this is a really important part of the process. That is getting feedback on your story from writers who are there to support you. Now, what happens if you don't know anybody? Well, this can be problematic. Now, online there are thousands of different writing groups all over the world that you can check out. But in my experience, a lot of those groups get dominated by a couple of people, by a handful of quote unquote capital W writers, and they can be problematic. So what you really want to do, I think, is to find writers who are local to you, that you know. That you've encountered that would be willing to get together with you every once in a while, and they can share their work with you, and you can share your work with them. And for me, that works really, really well. Now, one of the things that we do in our workshops and in our group coaching sessions is we build that community ourselves, and so. Writers come in and they're all more or less at the same level and get to know each other and build the trust, and that works really, really well. So we've had several writers who have gone through our workshops and our courses and so on, that then self-organize afterwards to keep that group together as they continue to write. And I think that works really, really well. So if you can find a local a writing group or a local workshop, or if you're comfortable meeting people online and getting to know them and building that trust that way, it can be really, really powerful and really important part of the writing process. So yes, so that was my experience with the novel that shall not see the light of day. And you know what, I realized that it was in trouble after I came back to it, after my work let up a little bit and I was able to get back to look at the writing. And I decided at that point, you know what, it was really tough to try to salvage this thing. But I did come back to it years later. Because I fundamentally liked the story itself, even if my characters were problematic. I liked the story. So I did look at it. I came back to it years later to see, once I had a bit more experience, essentially to see if I could salvage it again. But no, there was no point in going back and revising it. I changed so much as a writer and as a storyteller that it didn't appeal to me at all. So what I did, though, is I took the story, the fundamental story, and basically rewrote it. So I had different characters, I had different plot points. The story was essentially the same, though, because that's what appealed to me. And that story eventually grew into my novel called The Quantum Awakening. And I'm really happy with it now. That doesn't translate into sales, but that's a topic for another podcast. But I really do like that story, and in fact, I think it's probably the strongest, maybe the second strongest one that I've written. I really enjoyed that one. So this tale does have a happy ending in the sense that I was able to take that story once I had a bit more experience and skill in writing and storytelling, and create something that I'm really happy with and really enjoy. And I have to tell you as well, of course, that as I was writing The Quantum Awakening, I also relied on my own group, my own circle of writers for feedback and suggestions, and pointing out those things that I'm often blind to. So again, it's a really important part of the writing process. Now, that does raise the question, however, about, the fear of actually sharing your work with someone else. This is a real fear, and I certainly don't want to minimize it, because it takes a lot of courage to put yourself out there and give someone a couple of chapters of your story and ask for feedback, like specific feedback. Example, is there enough tension in this scene? Or is the dialogue crisp enough? Is there too much description? Those are the sorts of things that we as writers need to know, and we often become blind to our own stuff. So this is why it's important to get that constructive feedback. But there's a fear to this based on the risk of putting yourself out there. And the fear, these fears go way back, right? This is back to the days of the cave kind of thing, because inevitably the fear comes from one of being accepted or judged or laughed at or ridiculed or criticized in a bad way. Like those are all the risks of putting yourself out there. And it can take a while to overcome these fears. I know this personally too, because I go through the same emotions as any other writer. I wonder if readers are going to like my story. I wonder if my writing is actually good enough to put out there into the world. And this is true for every story that I've written. but it's important to come to terms with what those fears really mean, where they come from, and how to overcome them. And I think that's a topic for another day. But suffice to say that if you're going to be a writer, if you're going to be a creator in any way, you know this already. You have to put your stuff out into the world. You have to share it with others, and the risk is that some people will not like it, and but on the other hand, other people will. So I look at this in the way that the same thing with like book reviews. So when you eventually do publish and you put your book out there, some people will love it, some people will hate it, and others will be along that scale. Some will say, oh, it's not bad, it's okay. Others will gush over it. You're going to see all of those things. And you're going to get the reviews in Amazon and on Goodreads and everywhere else where some people love it and some people don't. I mean, you could go, you're not going to get 100% good reviews. You're not going to get 100% positive feedback from your writing circle. What you want is to evaluate what those reviews mean and what that constructive feedback means. And I think you would drive yourself crazy if you tried to please every reader out there. It's impossible to do. I mean, you can go look online, look at Amazon or Barnes and Noble or wherever reviews are. Look at Margaret Atwood's work or Stephen King's work, and yes, there will be lots of really good reviews, but there are also lots of really bad reviews too. And these are accomplished writers. I mean, they know what they're doing. They've been doing this a long time. They're some of the handful of writers who can actually make a really good living at their craft, and yet they still get bad reviews. So that part of the process is something that we simply cannot control, and we also have to come to terms with it because it's going to happen. Whenever you put something out there into the world, some will like it, some won't like it, and that's just the way it is. So if you're not prepared to understand what's happening here, then the idea of sharing your work in a smaller group with other writers can be really off-putting. It's like, I don't want to share it. I just want to keep it to myself. I'll share it when it's perfect. I'll share it when it's all done. I'll share it when it's it's great. That will never happen. And the other downside to that is that you could end up, like I did, with a novel that shall never see the light of day because it never benefited from feedback along the way. So this is really important, and I think this is where selecting those other writers to look at your work becomes critically important. You want to surround yourself with others who can help you and support you. They're not around to say, oh, this scene sucks and this setting is terrible and blah blah blah. It's not about that. It's about making your story and every element of your story much more effective than if you tried to do it all on your own. So that's plotting, setting, characters, dialogue, tension, pacing, like all of those things that others can help you with. So it's really important to find people that you can trust, who are there to support you, and hopefully then that will give you enough encouragement to keep pushing your work out into the world, whether it's publishing a short story on Amazon or whether it's finishing your novel and publishing that on Amazon or somewhere else as well. That becomes super important. All right, so in a nutshell, that's my sordid tale of the novel that shall never see the light of day, and the takeaway from this is an emphasis again on the need to overcome your fears of sharing your work and finding like-minded writers that you can trust to help make your writing more effective, and that you can help with their writing as well. So I hope that's helpful, and good luck with it, and keep writing, and we'll see you soon.